Anyway, on the Western Hotline, Joe Marino joins us of the Locked On Bills podcast. He does the Bill Squad show with me and Jerry O on YouTube and on the Locked On Bills channel as well. Good morning, Joe. How are you today?
Good morning, guys. I'm doing well. Hope you are.
We are. And before we get to the trade ideas, I wanted to kind of revisit the Carolina game and the things that went well. Because, we can sit here and talk about how the passing offense this and the passing offense that. I guess the big question I want to ask you, Joe, is as well as they ran the ball against Carolina, just throwing toss all the time, right? Throwing toss and running the same play over and over again. How repeatable a formula is that for the Bills against some other teams that they play and maybe some of the more important teams that they'll have to get by? Throwing the out to Cook, get him in space, and just kind of plow through another team the way they did Carolina.
I think the thing about replicating that script against other teams is it may or may not be necessary. And I think the Bills have done a good job this year of altering their rushing approach based on opponents. We've seen them come out with very heavy gap schemes and under center runs. We've seen them push the wide zone. We've seen them try to implement some different types of like the toss plays against Carolina. And so I think they're very game plan specific with their rushing offense. And against Carolina, where they have really big, good run stopping defensive tackles and Derek Brown and Ashawn Robinson and Bobby Brown and Tershawn Wharton, the last thing you want to do is run at those guys, especially when they have smaller and inexperienced edge players like Prince Emmanuel and DJ Wanham playing a lot of their snaps. And so you want to run at those guys, force the big guys to move laterally, and then the Panthers don't have very good linebackers, and now you're asking them to work laterally and fill windows. It was just kind of the right idea against Carolina. I tell you, it's not going to be the right idea against Kansas City, where they're bigger on the edge, they're slower at linebacker. You probably want to attack that front a little bit differently. So I think it speaks to the diversity of ways that the Bills can run the football and how they can be game plan specific with it.
And game plan specific Kansas City, you say slower linebackers. Is this a complete green light to run the ball and then really win in the play action game?
I would like to think so. Kansas City, I've got more work to do on them in the next day or two, but traditionally they'll ask Nick Bolton to cover linebackers, and if you get that, you got to get big-eyed and attack that matchup. Bolton's a good downhill player, but he's not the type of guy that's going to carry Dalton Kincaid down the seam. And, I think the Bills have traditionally done pretty well with that against Kansas City. Not always Kincaid, but sometimes it's Knox. But also there's been some really good James Cook in the passing game against Kansas City. So I think those are a couple of ways that the Bills need to prioritize moving the ball against the Chiefs this weekend.
Is there more, do you think, out of the backfield that it's potential for running back? Right now, Ty Johnson's not really a part of the offense, Ray Davis too, or do you feel like it should be a lot of James Cook and those other two are just secondary at this point?
Yeah, I think very much. I think that's, I guess, one of the disappointments of the rushing offense is that it's really been James Cook, and you haven't seen much from Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. And I think kind of the good news is James Cook's being really productive, but at the same time, that pace that he was on in the first month of the season's kind of come down. We were talking about him being 375 to 400 touches, and now that's more in the 335 range, which I think is a lot better for James. But if he's going to be this efficient with his touches, that's going to help him be productive and kind of make sure that you're not running him into the dirt. So the good news is they haven't really had to use the running back depth. But the bad news is you're kind of concerned if they did.
And you mentioned it a little bit about Kincaid, maybe up the seam, Bolton as a matchup this week. He didn't really play a lot, Joe, in this game against Carolina. It was only 14 snaps, and he did actually make a big play on a 3rd and 10. How much do you really feel like they've missed him being a part of the passing offense regularly in these last 2 weeks? Like, I don't know that he'll play a full workload this week. If he'll even go back to playing half, maybe he will. If he did, I guess just how much of a boost do you think that would be given the season he was already having?
Well, no doubt. I think he's proven to be probably the Bills' best pass catcher this year, and not having that guy probably says something about Josh Allen's last 2 games, where I think it's a little bit of a lull here for Josh, and not being able to have Kincaid, and then really missing out on Josh Palmer for a game and a half there as well. That's pretty meaningful, and those are your best separators down the field. And so we're frustrated with Josh Allen's down the field passing and what that looks like. Well, it'd be nice to have his best two guys, at full strength in doing that. Obviously there's bigger conversations to be had there, but when we think about some of those results, I think it is rooted in, probably wanting to have more for Palmer and Kincaid, and, whether that's Kincaid playing through this injury or Palmer not being available at all. I think that's hurt the passing offense, obviously.
Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast. Joe, before the break, we last segment, Joe's remembering the last 10, 20-plus yard touchdown passes. You go back all the way to 2022. The deep passing game, the 50 yards, 20 yards, whatever it is. I know you've had some numbers on Allen in this department, and how much of what they miss in that part of the game is about receiver, is about how the scheme works, and how much of it is Allen not doing his part in the deep passing game over the last year or two, because we've all seen the graphic, right? One passing touchdown over 20 yards in 2024, and are there none this year? So, how much of that would you lay at the feet of the quarterback?
Well, let's first acknowledge this. Josh Allen did have 3 deep passing touchdowns in the postseason last year, while the rest of the NFL had 10 combined, right? So I think that's pretty meaningful. He still shows it when he's shown it when he needs it, I guess. And of course, against Baltimore, he had a few as well. So that's worth pointing out. But
Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, and who's the third one?
Was the Ty Johnson one?
Johnson.
Okay, Ty Johnson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I think the reality of this is Josh Allen's never been a great deep ball thrower. He's been average, maybe slightly above average, but he's never been like an amazing pinpoint accuracy deep ball thrower. And last year he was 26 out of 32 in catchable ball rate on deep throws. Now, that's certainly the lowest of his career. In 2023, it was 53%, and then it was 60% in 2022 and 2021. So it's definitely probably has a lot to do with the changing landscape of his weapons, right? Those are the lowest percentage throws. They require the most chemistry, and you take away Diggs and Davis, who he threw the ball deep to. I think you can kind of expect that to come down a little bit. But the reality is there's just not a lot of vertical receiving talent, and you combine that with an average at best vertical thrower. I don't think you got a good recipe for a lot of success throwing the ball down the field. And one of my frustrations last year was that for as poor as the passer rating and completion percentage and catchable ball rate was on deep throws, the Bills were 5th in deep throw rate. They were throwing the ball deep all the time, and it wasn't very effective. And now this year they're throwing the ball deep not as much, and it's still not effective. So I think they've got to get the ingredients in place for this to be a big part of what they do. And look, in some ways it's majoring and minoring.
Right.
Deep throws are always going to be the lowest amount of throws that you consider just general plays that you're going to have. It's going to be under 15% of your passing offense to begin with. And, you obviously run the ball a ton too. So it's a small percentage of your offense. It's meaningful. I want it to be better. But I wish that he was a little bit more consistent with the other things right now, so we can truly put that, kind of in its proper context. But it's kind of an all-encompassing conversation right now.
Right, and you showed a play on your All-22 review. If fans remember this game, you're watching the Bills and the Panthers. The throw to Keon Coleman where it gets batted away. He runs like a quick little, like a flat curl, and Coleman comes in on the curl inside, and the ball gets batted away. And you point out that the structure of that play is such that Carolina has so many guys that are close to the Bills' line of scrimmage because there's no fear anywhere. So I guess what I'm getting at, Joe, is I'm not trying to get a Shaheed on the team because I need to throw him 7 deep balls a game. What I need him for is that a play like that where they try to throw to Coleman on a curl, that safety can't just be thinking like, well, I don't have to cover anything behind me because this team doesn't go there.
Yeah, I thought that was a good play to call out, Jeremy. I mean, it was a condensed set, so your formational width is very narrow. And Carolina's playing, I think it was 10 of their 11 defensive players were within like 7 yards of the line of scrimmage, and their deep safety was like maybe 10 yards of depth in the middle of the field. It's like, okay, there's just not a lot of space here. There's a lot of bodies in a small amount of space, and you're trying to slot, little, I don't know, what is it, maybe a 4-yard route. And of course that linebacker is going to be able to drive on it. There's nothing for him to be concerned with, whether that was the route combinations or just a lack of something that was going to stress him to kind of sink into his coverage. And so there's some challenges that the Bills have with creating the space that they need to slot a lot of these throws. And I think there's an implication for the quick game and the intermediate stuff that is a result of not necessarily having the threats vertically, much less the success throwing vertically. He didn't try. There wasn't even a deep throw in this game. The second time this year that Josh didn't throw a pass beyond 20, and then he had one other game. It was either Miami or the Jets. One of those games he threw none beyond 20, and then the other one he had one. So I guess in 3 of your 7 games, you had one or zero throws 20 yards or more down the field. And so, it's definitely part of what you'd like to be on the menu here for this team, but it's just not clicking right now.
To the other side of the ball, we saw Michael Hoecht, Maxwell Hairston, this defense that Brandon Beane, he went to overhaul the defense, and it's maybe finally starting to see parts of it. Granted, Ed Oliver's absence will be big. But what did you see from Hairston? What did you see from Hoecht in terms of how this defense can play differently? And, here comes your biggest test, Kansas City. We might want to see how they pass the test later in the year. But are they more equipped with those two in the lineup to try and deal with Kansas City in a week like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the Chiefs' offense is rolling right now. It's probably the best it's looked in 3 years. But I do think that they're positioned reasonably well with the reinforcements, especially the two you mentioned, Hoecht and Hairston. I really enjoy both players. Hoecht is a menace on the field. I mean, he's such a good, just a good all-around player. But his pass rush just gets me really excited with the athleticism that he has and the different alignments that he can play from. And he's just collapsing offensive linemen left and right with his ability to just convert speed to power. And then while doing that, he gets his hands on their wrists and their elbows and just forces them to give up their chest. And he's just pushing dudes into the quarterback. And he's very tenacious, and you can tell he gets under people's skin. He's a really fun player that I'm excited to see with him. And Bosa and Rousseau and Epinesa and that group should really elevate this pass rush against a couple of tackles here for the Chiefs that are suspect, right? Jawan Taylor's kind of been a struggling player for a while at right tackle, and then they're struggling at left tackle where their first-round pick, is kind of MIA right now with some challenges. And so there's some matchups to take advantage of there. And obviously, affecting Mahomes is going to be so critical. But, Hoyt's really exciting, but I really, really enjoyed the Harrison tape as well. Not that he was challenged at all in coverage, which I think says something, right? He was kind of where he was supposed to be. He was the primary. He covered the primary once on an outbreaker, and it was press coverage, got the hands on, got the jam, carried the route to the sideline. Dalton wanted to go to that throw. He couldn't, wasn't available. He moved on and threw the ball away. But what he did against the run, there were a couple plays against the run that just had me so excited. His second snap was the Panthers ran a condensed formation, so he's having to kind of play up on the line of scrimmage as the D-gap defender, and they pulled the tight end across the formation to kick him out. And Harrison he hunkered down and took on the block with perfect technique. He deployed a wrong arm and was able to really squeeze that gap down and position Dorian Williams and Jordan Poyer to combine for a tackle, showing a lot of physicality. We all saw the tackle he made in space, which was textbook technique. And then there was another play later on where they were running at outside to his area, and he was able to take Xavier Leggett and kind of push him back into the ball carrier and affect that ball carrier's flow and pushed him back into the pursuit of the defense. It was pretty cool to see. I think there's been some misconceptions out there because Harrison's not the biggest corner, that he's not physical and doesn't tackle. I've pushed back against that every step of the way, and I thought there were some really nice examples of him being physical and hunting, not just the football and breaking on the ball, but being physical, tackling, playing through contact, and doing that part of what's required out of a cornerback as well.
Yeah, I remember, right, his first press conference called him a willing tackler, and you would have saw that on Sunday. Did you see enough snaps from Jordan Hancock to decide even whether you want to see more, or was it too little to kind of get a taste of it?
Oh, yeah, I want to see more for sure. If nothing else, for the athleticism that he provides. I think that's really meaningful. And look, you're taking, if he's not fully ready to go, that's not nothing. You kind of get away from, your ability to disguise some coverages perhaps. But, if you're just saying, hey, you're the half field safety, let's take advantage of some range here. I think that's something he can handle. And I think that's why the their reps were a little bit limited, and you want to make sure that you can still be the defense you want to be, but also try to give yourself the best chance when you can get some athletes on the field. And so I thought the Bills balanced that pretty well. I think that'll probably continue, but being able to get that range on the field at safety, where it just hasn't been there with Rapp, and then of course Poyer, that's not where he's at in his career. I think there are times where he makes sense to have on the field, and I'd anticipate that to be a platoon situation as Hancock's gets his feet wet and learns the defense and can do more. But there are situations where that athleticism can really matter, and I thought the Bills did a good job of getting him on the field in the right situations against Carolina.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to Joe. Get those all 22 breakdowns, all that stuff. Big one this week, Joe, and then on to
the deadline.
On to the deadline, right? On to the deadline. On to Miami, and of course we're scoreboard watching with New England because this race looks like it's going to go down to the wire.
Yeah, it's different feel, but it'll be fun to kind of navigate through the rest of the year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Joe Marino.